Good morning. Thank you very much for joining us. Everybody joining us via our online link. Thank you very much for accepting the invite. And, it's going to be an interesting day that we're going to have a chat about fitment and inspection. And hopefully there's a lot of information that we can share today. Now, just to introduce myself, my name is Anderson Celia. I'm the training manager at Protector Safety Gear. Just a few admin arrangements that we want to do before we physically go into the presentation itself. You will see that this is an online session, so there won't be allowed any questions as I go through the presentation or the workshop itself, but there is the chat box available that you can use during the session that you can actually ask questions pertaining to certain sections. But there will be also a 15-minute section afterwards where you can actually ask questions, and I will be available to actually answer those questions via the live platform. And then also we will be distributing this online version after the workshop itself. So if there is anything additional that you want to focus on, you are more than welcome to actually use that as reference. Just a little bit of background about Protector before we start, and that is that Protector is currently Service CETA accredited and IWH approved training provider. We're also an international certified training center through 3M, and that means that we have exposure, or we can expose you as the client, to over 20,000 products in the fall protection range that 3M has currently. That means we can train you according to the local unit standards as well, and also give you limited courses that is internationally certified, which is both OSHA's approved for Canada and the US. So that is background. This will be the first of a few workshops that we're going to run, but this specific one, like the invite actually indicated, is we're going to look at fall protection equipment, fitment, and inspection. So if everybody's ready, and we can start with the workshop, and like I said, just to confirm again, if there's questions, please use the chat box, and we can answer those questions via that online platform as well. The first point we're going to discuss is, obviously ask the questions, but why is fitment and inspection so important? Now, everybody uses equipment like harnesses and lanyards on a daily basis, but fitment and inspection is sometimes seen as something that is a smaller activity that happens before you actually start to work, sometimes seen as laborious because the guys don't always do that properly, and then they just focus on the work they have to do during the day. But at the end, fitment and inspection is a key component of making sure that when you actually go onto site, you actually work safe. Right, now, fitment is not just a visual thing. You look at your harness, you see that it's actually proper, in place, there's no damages. You put it onto your body without actually following a certain procedure, and then you want to continue working with it. Right, just as reference, if you fall in a harness, and this is what the harness and lanyard, which is a basic component of working rights, consist out of, you can generate up to 600 kilograms of pressure on your body. Now, depending on what type of equipment you use, that equipment can actually generate a little bit more pressure on your body. Non-shock absorbing lanyards, if you fall with those, you can actually generate up to 2,200 kilograms of pressure on your body. So if you look at that amount of pressure that's put onto a person's body or onto the equipment, if you can use that, then that equipment needs to be in proper, safe environment. It must be safe to be used, free of any wear and tear, any damages that can actually cause that equipment to fail once being put under pressure during a rest situation where the guy's actually fallen off a structure and being suspended in that harness and lanyard. Right, so today we're going to focus on that specific activity of fitment and inspection. Now, as with anything that you have to do, you have to look at the legal compliance section that's part of that. And in this case, there is two parts of legislation that we normally focus on. The main one obviously being the construction regulations. And that is Construction Regulations 10.2D, which covers part of your fall protection planning, site-specific fall protection plan. And that covers that you need to test, inspect, and maintain your fall protection equipment. So as you see that it's not just currently a step, that is a tick box that you have to cover during a process of before going on to site or before going on to work. It's actually a legal requirement that is actually part of a site-specific fall protection plan. Now, if we can stand still on that for a quick moment, the fall protection plan is extremely important. That is, again, a legal document that does not just cover this point that I've just mentioned, fitment and inspection, but it also covers a lot of points, up to 5 requirements that you need to have, which includes things like medical fitness, it includes training, and obviously with a focus on training that you need to have, it links up with your fitment and inspection. But we're going to discuss that a little bit later as we go through the workshop. There's your risk assessment you need to have in place. And then obviously one of the most important points is also rescue. So obviously, if equipment fails during a working right activity, then rescue is not necessarily seen as a rescue. It will be seen as a recovery, and that is actually where you have a lot of fatalities, where you've got people falling, equipment failing, and actually that is the end result, the consequence of that activity. Right, so the first section we're going to cover is your construction regulations 10.2D, legal compliance, and that is to make sure that you've got an inspection, servicing, and maintenance procedure in place. And that links up with what we're currently doing and what we're currently going to look at today. The second piece of legislation is that you've got your rope access industry, where you look at things like your SANS standards, SANS 33. You also have your SANS 10333-3, and that focuses on the equipment selection, management, and inspection of that equipment. Now, in the fall arrest industry, we do use that as reference as well. So it's not purely just that fall arrest and rope access are seen as separate. We do make sure that we use that as reference, because some of the equipment that we use as part of fall arrest also falls into the rope access industry or rope access category. Right, so that as reference, very important. Now, many people will also ask the question, where does the ISO standards fit in? And the ISO standards is also seen as very important, because these days we focus on locally, we focus on your SANS standards or your SABS standards. As I've just said, your SANS 33, for instance, covering rope access equipment. But at the end of the day as well, your ISO standards will cover inspections. Now, sometimes the difference between these two is that your local standards will say that it's a 3-monthly formal inspection, where an ISO standard will normally go and say that it's a 6-monthly formal inspection. So there is a little bit of differences, and that's also where it's important for you as the client or you as the person where you've got personnel working in that area to actually focus on what is important for you. Now, at the end of the day, inspections does cover a certain procedure. And if you look at the procedures, there's normally 3 types of inspections that we want to focus on. Now, that inspections are seen as pre-use inspections. And if I can maybe just run through the list, I'll explain each one individually. But you've got pre-use inspections, you've got your interim inspections, and you've got your formal inspections. Right, so if you focus on the pre-use inspections first. Now, pre-use inspections are normally where you've got your user as part of the process. Your user will normally come onto site, he will have his equipment, or he will be issued his equipment from a bulk storeroom, or he will use his own equipment out of a separate kit bag that he's using, and he will at the end of the day need to make sure that he's inspecting that equipment. So that is done daily before use. Now, obviously, most of us don't work right on a daily basis. We might do it once a week, twice a week, but some of us, like the construction industry, for instance, those guys are exposed to working rights on a daily basis. And that's why every morning before you start work, you need to make sure that you inspect your equipment, you fill in the proper documentation, and you've got that as reference or evidence to show that you have gone through that process. First of all, making sure that you're legally compliant, but also making sure that what you are going to use that day is actually safe to use. In case of a fall, then you know that that equipment will actually work. We're going to go into a little bit more detail in terms of what is normally required from you during that pre-use inspection, but documentation-wise, but we will discuss that a little bit later on. The second phase, or the second level that we normally go through, is your interim inspections. Now, those are inspections that's normally done on a monthly basis, and it sometimes varies between clients, it sometimes varies between sites, and it also varies between industries. But we normally say from our side during the training process, we tell the guys, interim inspections is a monthly process. So not daily before use, but normally monthly. And that is normally where you've got things like spot checks. It might be part of a supervisor. It might be seen as an equipment controller that actually goes onto site. That's part of the process initially, but it doesn't really inspect all the equipment per kit or per serial number. He normally does spot checks, and what he does is does a verification process where he actually sees that, listen, yes, there is inspection sheets that's been completed, the guys are doing the inspections, and sometimes if there is equipment that's had damage, was that noted? Was that indicated into the documents and made sure that that has been processed? Because if something is happening to a piece of equipment and it's not being taken further and the process is not followed to actually put it into a isolated area, a quarantine area, as we're going to mention, then that equipment gets back into circulation, and that can actually be extremely hazardous to the people using that, especially when you've got a bulk store, because every day there's a different user. And that's a process that you actually need to do, and that you also need to make sure as part of your inspection levels. The third inspection level is what we call formal inspections, and this is where you pull in a little bit more of your SMEs. Now, a SME stands for your subject matter experts, And that is where you get the guys on a 3-monthly basis. And this is now where sometimes it gets a little bit interesting, where the guys will say, well, every 3 months or every 6 months, like you will see the ISO standard say. So obviously, at the end of the day, it's up to you to decide how you want to do that. But the SMEs are normally guys like ourselves that go onto site, that actually inspect your equipment, but it's not physically the inspection part that we actually focus on. We actually go a little bit further, and we focus on the recertification component. So if there's equipment that's damaged, and you are a little bit worried about, can I reuse that? Must I destroy that? We can come in through the quarantine process, actually inspect that equipment, and then tell you, listen, the following equipment you can use. We will normally recertify that for a maximum of about 12 months. Or we will say, listen, it needs to be destroyed because the wear and tear and the damages is of such an extent that we cannot put it back into service. That is normally not just done by a process of visually inspecting something. We've got a whole process that we follow where we put reports in place. We actually provide you a certificate of destruction or taking it out of service, and that will link up back to your equipment list or your inventories that you use to make sure that that is then actually indicated. So in case in future that harness or lanyard there's queries on that, then there is a process that you can fall back onto. So just to recap again, those 3 levels that you need to work through is your pre-use inspection, your interim inspection, and then obviously your formal inspections. If you've got questions on that during the process, please feel free to ask that. It is a process that is different between certain clients and certain industries. It's not set in stone, but at the end of the day, those 3 levels are seen as a requirement to make sure that your process of inspection, servicing, and maintenance is actually in place, and there is checks and balances that need to be covered. The next step we're going to focus on is that many people see inspection and maintenance as purely focusing on harnesses, lanyards, and a safety helmet. Now, as you might have known, that during a full arrest activity, the 3 basic components of a full arrest system, and we normally refer to it as a FAS kit, is a full body harness, a double leg full arrest lanyard, and a safety helmet. But that is not actually where it ends. Now, initially, fitment and inspection will focus on those key components, but remember, your equipment can also be varied. It can change, it can be more, it can be way more in terms of the activities that you perform on site, and that's normally why selection of certain PPE is not driven by the inspection, but the inspection will be linked up to the equipment that you've actually selected for that specific task. Right now, the considerations you normally need to keep in mind of what equipment I need to use, that is based on your risk assessment. Now, as you will see, the site-specific fall protection plan, one of the first requirements you have is that you need to have a risk assessment in place. For working rights, that's normally seen as a task-specific risk assessment, and that will focus on, are you just accessing a scaffolding? Are you accessing a structure? Are you working on top of rooftops? Is there rescue activities? Is there temporary systems you need to install? And obviously, based out of that, you will need to go out and physically select the right equipment for the task. But now keep in mind, when you go into your process, you've now selected your equipment inspection and maintenance procedure is then not focused only purely on the harnesses and lanyards that you use. It does cover everything. Now, why do I say that? Because in fall protection, everything that you're using as part of your working on right activities has to be certified. Certified meaning it carries either an EN, which is your European norm standard, or it carries a local standard, which is your South African national standard, your SANS standard. Now, just to confirm that as well, many people make the remarks when we normally go to site in terms of, I only use local equipment. I only use SABS approved or SANS approved equipment. But keep in mind that the SABS adopts the EN from overseas. And then they turn it into a local standard, which is called the SANS standard through the SABS. Now, if you take a simple, straightforward, full body harness, as you can see the 3 units that I've got here in front, these will normally carry a EN 361 standard, which is the internationally approved standard for a full body harness. But now what happens is the SABS will adopt that, they will turn it into a SANS standard, and all they will basically do is they will just add a 50 in front. Meaning an EN 361 standard will be now a 50361 SANS standard. So just to clarify that, because that is also very important. You work with the same equipment and they're on the same standard. If there's a 50 in front or not, it doesn't really matter. And that's also part of your inspection process that you need to make sure the guys understand on the ground. What equipment they use and is it certified. Now, obviously, there's a whole range of equipment you can use. The full body harness with your 361 standard, your full-rest lanyard, double-leg lanyard, scaffolding hooks, pre-attached or a separate unit. It covers its own standard like an EN355. And then your safety helmet, as you can see here in front as well, it normally covers an EN397. But for working at heights, we've got a few additional things, and that is that it must also be certified for a 12492 standard. Now that allows the safety helmet to actually withstand side impact from a fall as well. Which, if you work if you're in the work at height industry, it's extremely important because you've got things like pendulum swing. You've got guys working in different areas. He can slip and fall, and he can hit his head from the side. And that helmet needs to withstand that as well. Right. So those are typically one of the main points that we normally focus on during inspection as well, and that is the standard of the equipment. Now, just going back to my first point, you've now selected your equipment. You've made sure that you're going to buy according to the right standard. And you're going to focus on the activity you're going to perform on site. Right, so let's have a look at a few of those equipment. Now, if you work on a rooftop, for instance, so a standard full-rest harness, lanyard, and a safety helmet will not be sufficient to actually access a roof safely. You need to add equipment to that. Some of the equipment you might add might be anchor points. Right, so if it's certified anchor points, you normally look at an EN795 standard, and that can either be a certified or a mobile anchor that you can use. You need to look at things like slings, webbing slings that normally fit around the beam because of the size of the beams, and those are certified as well. And then you've got your temporary horizontal lifeline systems. You can have temporary vertical lifeline systems, and obviously added onto that, because you're exposed to full arrest, you need to have a look at rescue systems. Right, so the idea that I want to bring across to you is that keep in mind that it's not just a harness and lanyard. You need to make sure that everything you use obviously is certified based on the risk assessment that you've conducted. And that equipment that you're going to be that's part of your risk assessment is actually on site. And if it's on site, it must form part of your equipment inspection and maintenance procedure. Right, very important. Not necessarily just a harness and lanyard that the guy uses personally, everything. All right, so that's a key point that I want to make sure that you guys are focused on, and that you make sure that you make part of your process, because we see that in fall protection plans. The guys focus on the bare minimum just to get the plan through the process, and that's not the case. You need to make sure the guys do inspections, because if something of the other units fail as well due to non-inspection, then it can cause a fatality, the same as with the harness and lanyard. Right, so if we look at that as well, then you can look at your pieces of equipment that you're going to use, and if you start at the basics. Now, a harness, a lanyard, and a safety helmet is the key component. So let's start with that. All right, so what do you normally inspect on a harness and lanyard? Now, there's 4 components that we normally focus on for the guys to inspect. And that is, first of all, that you need to make sure that you look at your metal components. Right, so each harness has got D-rings. Right, as you can see from these harnesses, you will see that, yes, there is differences between the harnesses. You've got high-end harnesses up to your entry-level harnesses, but I mean, all of them has got either buckles, or like this one, it's got a trigger system where you actually have to physically pull the system and turn it. But it's still the same idea, and that is to actually make sure the harness is fitting your body properly. So metal components is one of the first things that you need to check for. Right, I'll go into these a little bit detail afterwards. I just want to run through the different points, and then we can focus on each one separately. So metal components. The next component is your webbing. Right, webbing is very important. You will see the whole harness consists out of webbing, and obviously that's a key component because that's normally where all the wear and tear will happen due to the type of work or activity that you're performing. And then, of course, you will see that the harness itself is also kept together through what we call stitching. Right, now stitching, you will see it's all across the whole harness, and that is a very important point as well, because if there's any loose sections on a harness, that can cause major problems. The last section that is key as well is actually your labeling and your certification. Right, and that's making sure, as I've said in the initial part of the workshop, that each piece of equipment must be certified. Either being a 361 standard for a full body harness, a lanyard being a 355 standard, or a safety helmet being a 397 standard. So that you will find on your label. Now, a first point that I want to focus on is that if any of these pieces of equipment does not have a label, then it's not safe for use. Right, I can put that point in bold letters, and I want to make sure that you focus on that, because many people assume that you've got a certificate of competence or a certificate of conformance in your office, and that links up to the harness and lanyard, and you know that it fits to that harness. But if that is not on the harness itself, you will not be able to use that harness and lanyard. Right. It must be visible and available on your harness or your lanyard or your safety helmet or anything that you physically use. And that is due to reference, because obviously on site you don't always have that certificate of conformance. Right. So those are then the 4 points. Just to run through them briefly again, you've got your metal components, you've got your webbing, you've got your stitching, and you've got your certification and your label. Right. So if you look at your webbing, now obviously the webbing itself, if I can start off that as a point, because that is normally like I said, where most of the exposure will happen, is that the webbing itself is a material. Like any piece of material you find out there, it's got limitations, it's got exposures, and you need to make sure that what you check for is normally standard wear and tear. All right. What we normally focus on extensively is the fact that there must be no cuts, there must be no holes inside the webbing itself, and obviously things like burn marks. Now, burn marks, you get 2 types. You get chemical burns and you get heat burns. Chemical burns will normally cause a discoloration into the webbing. So it's not just the fact that you need to physically just look at the harness. Chemical burns can also make some of the webbing a little bit brittle, and that's why you need to, when we train and we show the basic training to the guys, it's looking and feeling, visual and tactile. You need to make sure that you focus on those 2 aspects and make sure that you do the whole harness. Right, so webbing is a key component. Then if you go over to your metal components, now again, that's normally where you connect yourself to a lanyard or you connect yourself to a system. So those metal components, especially your D-rings, are extremely important. Right, so what do you check on all your metal components? Now metal, obviously, if it's under stress, it will bend. So what you look for is deformities. Is it bent? Is the D-ring in the shape of a D anymore? Because if it's not, then obviously there's been certain pressures on there, and that can actually cause that equipment to fail next time. Right, it's metal, so obviously exposure levels, when you're working close to the ocean, there might be rust. There might be cracks as well, obviously visible cracks. Make sure that there was a lot of pressure on that system, and that can actually cause that D-ring to fail, or a person has fallen with it, and that will actually cause it to fail next time. But you need to make sure that you inspect that. Now, if you look at this D-ring that the guy that this harness has there, especially on this one as well, on the side rings, then you will see that sharp edges is also very important. Now, sharp edges can happen from a person dropping the harness on the floor during taking it off after work, and that can actually then cause the webbing to be cut. As the person works, the sharp edges will cause the webbing to be cut, and that can actually cause that webbing to then fail during a full arrest situation. Right, so metal components, extremely important. The second point we want to focus on. The third point is stitching, and it's basic, straightforward. You want to focus on any loose stitching. You will see that most of your components are stitched together, and obviously you need to make sure that you, again, visually, but also tactile, feeling, you must pull the areas apart, not to physically break it, but to see can it actually move apart, because then it means the stitching has had some challenges. There's been exposure, there's been wear and tear, and you can't use that harness anymore. Right, the last one that we're going to focus on is your label. Now, label is extremely important in that a label is your visual confirmation that this harness is compliant. All right, now on the harnesses you will see it's sometimes in different areas. On the harness, it might be at the back, it might be at the butt strap, it might be in a certain area where you need to hide it away on the harness to actually prevent it from being damaged, because obviously things like wear and tear can actually, working in an area where there's a lot of friction onto the harness, that can actually cause that label to be damaged. For instance, you will see on this ExoFit Next harness, it's actually inside a Velcro casing. Right, so that means that the person must actually open it up to physically look inside. And that casing actually also protects it during the exposures that the guy will be exposed to when working in a different area. Right, so, but what do you inspect on a label? Many people normally ask that question as well. A label will normally tell you a few things. First thing, serial number. Right, everything you buy from a manufacturer will have a serial number. And that serial number is your reference back to the physical standard that it was tested to. So if you buy a harness according to an EN361 standard, the serial number will link to a certain batch where it was manufactured, the batch was tested, and that makes sure that you can then ask questions in case something happens to the harness, it failed due to a manufacturer's fault, that serial number will be your reference point. Right, as I've just mentioned, the standard, very important. You will ask the question, EN361, is that part of the harness itself? Right, and you need to check for that. Then obviously also your manufacturer's details. Who manufactured your harness? Right, again, if there's any problems, any challenges, you can go back to the manufacturer with these contact details and you can make sure that you can actually use that. Right, the third point, or the fourth point, which is actually very important, and that is the manufacturing date. Now, on certain harnesses, you normally find it as a MFG abbreviation, manufacturing date, but at the end of the day, it's very important. Now, in the international scene that we work with, from a protector point of view, we work with international harnesses as well. Harnesses that comes out of Europe, out of France, out of Germany, out of America, due to certain requirements that some of our clients have. Now, these harnesses, from a manufacturing point of view, are certified for 10 years. Right. It's not necessarily seen in the local industry like that, because obviously locally we only focus on harnesses, or the harnesses is developed and manufactured only for 5 years. Right, so the 5 years will normally be indicated on the harness itself, where it says it was manufactured in 2018, it must now actually be taken out of service in 2023. Right, and that's also a key component that you need to check for. Right, is that harness still safe to be used? Now, like the international harnesses that we use for 10 years, I mean, obviously it won't sometimes be able to be used for 10 years. Due to wear and tear, the type of work that you do, the exposure levels, it will be reduced. But that is a key component that you need to find out. So when you purchase the equipment, you select the equipment, ask the question, how long is it certified for? And it's basically not that you want to have a cost-saving exercise, it's because you want to make sure that you guys are using equipment that is within that manufacturer's period. If not, you have to have it replaced. All right, so those are the key points we normally do. And I just want to stress that at the end of the day, it is visually and it is tactile, meaning looking and feeling throughout the whole process. The third component, and that is a functionality test. Now, that normally comes in with things like your lanyards. Now, a lanyard itself is exactly the same as a piece of harness. It's got a metal component, it's got webbing, it's got stitching, and it's got labels as well. So normally there's a lot of synergies between the two inspections, and that's why it's so easy to quickly do an inspection like that. So visually and tactile, you look, you feel. But with a lanyard as well, you get things like hooks, connectors. Obviously, you get scaffolding hooks. You might have small little snap hooks like these. But at the end of the day, the functionality tests come in where you actually have to test the function of the piece of equipment. Now, a connector like this is normally certified to a 362 standard, a EN 362. And obviously, you check for the standard because it's a piece of metal as well. Is it rusted? Is it bent? But the functionality test is extremely important. All right. If it's opening and closing properly, is it closing automatically? Is the gate actually remaining open? Because obviously there might be a little bit of rust or damage inside the mechanism, then it's actually certified that it's not to be used. Right, you need to replace that. And that is why it's so important that when you do these inspections, or even during the training process, when you prepare the guys for going out working on site with this equipment in a high-risk environment, you need to stress to them that inspection is very important. Looking, feeling, and the functionality test. The question we normally find during any type of training as well is that who can inspect equipment? Now, it's a straightforward answer. In South Africa, you've got what we call unit standards, and those unit standards are trained by accredited training providers. At this stage, Protector is both accredited and an IWH-approved training provider. Right, so the course that we normally focus on, if a guy comes to us and say, I want to have my guys inspect the equipment, is what we call basic full arrest, and that is in line with US W9998. Now, that unit standard itself covers a range of outcomes, but one of those outcomes is that it certifies the person to actually inspect and maintain fall protection equipment. All right, so that is seen as a minimum. So when the guy works with the equipment, he can do the daily before use inspection, the pre-use inspection, as I previously mentioned. And that is important because obviously he's the person using that equipment. So competency provides that liability back to the user to make sure that, listen, you're competent, you can now inspect your own equipment. And obviously, if you find a problem with the equipment from your training, from your experience that you've now had during your training, you need to now follow the next step. Obviously, that can be your interim inspections, going back to your supervisor, telling him, listen, there's a problem with my harness and lanyard, we need to have a look at these. We need to replace that, I cannot use that for the day. Or a step further is that the guy will need to take it further into the specialist or the formal inspections, And that is taking it into a SME and obviously making sure that they can then either recertify or remove it from service. So as you can see, there's a lot of synergies between everything that we do during a working ride activity. And the fact that you do a simple inspection, testing, and maintenance of your equipment is so important, because that is the foundation on which the person will go onto site and use that equipment safely. If that is the case, then obviously it's very easy for him to then actually work in an environment where he actually feels confident that the equipment will actually work as it's supposed to. Certified within the manufacturer specifications and within the limitations. Right, now speaking of limitations, that is a very important point that most of us also focus on. Now, if you look at the harness itself, you might be in a situation where you've got workers that is well over or maybe a little bit over 100 kgs, which is not necessarily that the guy is not medically fit. He's medically fit. He's just a big guy, and he still needs to work at height. All right, so just for interest's sake, an EN361 full body harness only gets that certification up to, when it's tested, up to 100 kilograms. Right, I'm not sure if any one of you know that, but it's an interesting fact that we normally try and convey during our training courses as well. So what now happens when you go and you purchase a harness? The guy weighs about 110, medically fit, big guy, strong guy, he needs to work at height, but he needs to use a harness that's only certified up to 100. What now? So obviously there's options available. You need to make sure that you ask the manufacturers for a harness that's certified for a heavier weight, so make sure that it covers the user's the limitations is actually higher, so the guy can actually use that on site. Right, but many people don't know that when they actually inspect the harness. Is that one component that they check for? Most of the times the answer is no. Right, and that's why it's so important. So when you inspect your equipment, or even when you select the equipment for usage on site, ask the questions. Know your workforce, make sure that you keep that as part of your considerations, and also make it part of your inspection requirements. Right, now, just for reference sake, what we currently have in the industry is that, and this is part of the range that we provide. Now, if you look at the baseline harness, the entry-level harness as we call it here, the Rebel harness, now this you will see is a standard harness. Same components as I've just mentioned. For a full body harness, you've got your shoulder strap, butt straps, you've got your scaffolding hooks, you've got your buckle in front, your D-ring at the back. So it's an entry-level harness for guys climbing scaffolding, working on a construction site, but still need to make sure that they've got a fall arrest system as part of that. But this full body harness, as it is here, obviously you will see that it's got a lanyard. It's got a lanyard that it's actually pre-attached to the back. Right, so this whole unit is actually certified for 140 kilograms. Right, it makes it rather unique in the fact that it's an entry-level harness, but it does cover the range. The limitations of the harness is actually bigger, and that provides you that you can use this on a wider scale for most of your workforce. You don't have to get special harnesses designed or special certifications from your manufacturer to actually use these harnesses. Right. The next one is you will see that you've got things like your Delta harness, your ExoFit Next harness, and these again are certified again up to 140, between 130 to 140 kilograms. Again, a very versatile harness, a bit of a higher end harness, but at the end of the day, it suits the requirements of what the guys will actually do on site. All right, so as you can see, there is still a lot of requirements as well, and safe working loads is very important. Another thing that I can just mention, if you look at lanyards, now, many lanyards these days are normally provided to people. They say, listen, always hook up as high as possible, making sure that you limit the fall distance, your fall clearances are limited. But then you've got unique systems like these. And these are, again, certified, EN certified. But you will see it's a little bit different to your normal lanyards. They've got like these sliding beams that can actually fit under each D-ring separately. So it can actually fit any harness, but at the end of the day, you will see it's in an SRL format, a self-retracting lifeline, but you use it as a lanyard. You get it in a single leg format, you get it in a double leg format. What makes this unique is that it's designed for 140 kilograms, but as you will see on the casing itself, it's also edge protected. Right, 0.5 millimeter sharp edge. So if the person falls over an IBR sheeting, an I-beam that's got a sharp edge, which is natural for any type of structure like that, then this system is designed to withstand that force, that pinch points, as we call it. And then obviously you get your scaffolding hook, looks a little bit different, but obviously bigger in size, but it's also got a 1.6 ton rating on the gate. All right, now why do I keep on throwing all this technical detail to you? Right, so because when you're exposed to areas where this type of equipment is being used, this is not the similar inspection as a standard lanyard. There's no webbing, as you will see. Yes, you've got this type of casing, but that's not proper webbing. This is just a nylon material covering the shock absorbing pack. You've got stainless steel or galvanized cable systems. You've got a proper self-retracting lifeline mechanism inside. So obviously what you need to keep in mind is that your inspection criteria will be different between that lanyard, which is a standard lanyard, and a unique lanyard like this. Now, if I can just reiterate again, your fall protection plan and your risk assessment that's part of your fall protection plan will identify some of these equipment as important. But your inspection criteria will have to be adjusted to cover this equipment as well. There is differences. The weight rating is different. How you can use that is different as well. And obviously training is an important part of that process as well. So you're not training the guy just to inspect the standard lanyard. You have to expose him to equipment like this. So in future when he works with this, then he knows what to inspect, what is the safe working loads, and where he can actually use this safely. Now just for reference, this lanyard, this SRL, is designed for foot level tie-off. It's the only one in the world that you can actually hook up at your feet and you are allowed to fall with it. All right, so there is certain unique features built in, and again, very important for the user to understand this so you can actually work within those limitations. Right, so very important as well, there is so many equipment out there that you can have a look at. There is your work positioning lanyards, as you can see here in front, different mechanisms, different types of applications that you can use that for. For instance, you will see your standard ones that you have doesn't necessarily have a protective sleeve, but again, depending on where you want to use that, this is a key component that you need to check for. But you've got things like rope that you use as well. Now, if you look at rope, it's got a 1891 standard, a EN 1891. So it means that, yes, you're using it for a work positioning lanyard, and a work positioning lanyard is also certified. You're using it only for positioning on the side of a structure. But again, the components that you need to inspect, you need to understand what is that used for. It's not for fall arrest, it's for positioning, and it's used in a situation where you want to work hands-free. Right, inspection criteria will normally stay the same as a standard piece of equipment. You've got your metal components, you've got your rope systems, you've got your trigger lanyard, your trigger system that you have to use. Again, so it's visually, tactile, and functionality. And I think that's one of the most important points that I want to bring across today, is that when you inspect something, you've got your 4 areas that you need to inspect, like your webbing, your D-rings, your stitching, and your label. But also make sure that you focus on the functionality, the tactile, and the visual inspections, because that is sometimes where it's a bit lacking on site as well. And through all of those processes, there's a very good chance that you will pick up something if there is damage to the equipment, and you have to report that. Obviously, added on to that is your certifications, your safe working loads that you need to check and that you need to verify, because at the end of the day, if those are not within the limitations of what you want to do with that, you need to address that. You need to focus on that, and you need to make sure that you get equipment that actually complies to that. Focusing back, we've now looked at the pieces of equipment. We have gone through what you need to inspect and how you inspect that. What documentation is normally required during inspection and maintenance? There's various. I mean, we've seen a lot on sites that's different, that's similar. That's a lot of the documentation you need to fill in, but there's also ones that's limited. Limited in terms of it does cover the equipment the guy will use, and it's a basic, is the equipment safe for use, yes or no? Now, normally those are not really enough or sufficient. You need to make sure you get a checklist that will cover the full body harness, but with all the components you need to inspect. All 4 levels, meaning metal components, the webbing, the stitching, the labeling, the safe working load, everything is inspected in detail. And the user normally needs to fill in that pre-use inspection checklist. Additionally, what we also require from the employer is to have an inventory, and that's basically in terms of a big site like we will find normally with you or with your clients that you normally have to support, is that on construction sites you've got 100, 200, up to 300 guys maybe working with harnesses. So you need to make sure that you know how many harnesses are available. What is the serial numbers of those harnesses? Are they safe for use? Are they being inspected properly? Are they stored properly? Right, and that's all linking back to your inventory. And that will make sure that you know when you do checks on a monthly, or when you've got your function or your formal inspections done by your SMEs, they will normally also go and have a look at that and say that is your paperwork in place. Because remember, at the end of the day, there's a working right accident. There's two things we normally want to focus on. Is it a human error? Meaning, did the guy make a mistake? Was he trained? Did he use the equipment correctly? Did he inspect the equipment correctly? And secondly, was it an equipment failure? Did the equipment fail? It was used correctly, the guy was competent, but did the equipment just fail? Was it the manufacturer's fault? And those are things that you need evidence for. And that is why your checklists and your inventories and those type of things, and even things like in your fall protection plan, when you do that, you will also have to cover things like quarantine procedures. If there's damaged equipment, you put it into a quarantine area, right? Those procedures and those documentation has to be in place to make sure that at the end of the day, there is evidence showing that you are following a proper procedure. You're legally compliant, but you're also making sure that you align those with the equipment that you have on site. Right. Now, the workshop that we're currently doing only focuses on fitment and inspection. In the next workshops, we're going to look at things like certified systems, anchor points, temporary horizontal lifelines. And obviously, those are things that we want to highlight to you as well in terms of inspections and maintenance. But over and above, there's things like installation and usage as well. But I'll confirm that at the end of the workshop, what we're going to focus on next. Right, so inspection components, if you've got questions, please ask those during the end of the workshop. Now, when you get to fitment is also a key component of the process, because now you've inspected, you've got your paperwork in place, but now you need to put that harness on your body. Right, how do you do that? Now, as you will see, most of these harnesses you will see in front of you, these work like a normal, if I can use a reference, like a shirt. Now, a shirt you put from your shoulders and you work your way down with the buttons. The same with a harness. The harness has got your shoulder straps. So the first thing you always do is fit the harness over your shoulders. You must make sure that the harness webbing is normally flat, because every twist that's in a harness is normally seen as what we call a pressure point. And when you fall, that pressure point will cause you pain. Right, additional pressure on your body, additional injuries in your body, and you don't want to have that. So firstly, fit the harness over your shoulder. Now the next step, when we normally train the guys, the first things they always want to do the chest or the legs. The first thing you need to do during that is that you need to focus on what we call the butt strap. Right, and it is what it actually says. It's actually designed for your butt. And that is why we need to make sure that the butt strap is at the right place. It's not above here, because obviously, keep in mind, if you fall and the butt strap is around your waist, you put a lot of pressure on your kidneys, on your lower back, and that can cause a lot of pain, a lot of discomfort, and actually cause you to be going into suspension trauma a little bit faster. Then when you put the butt strap at the bottom of your butt, then remember, as a harness, you can physically kick in, put the butt strap a little bit further under your butt, and obviously that will cause you to actually sit into the harness. So it's a bit more comfortable as well. Right, gives you additional support. The next thing that we then do after fitting your shoulder strap, your butt strap, is your chest strap. And that is basically making sure that the chest strap is fitted properly, not too tight, because obviously you don't want to limit the amount of oxygen you can take in, put pressure on your lungs. You want to make sure that it's actually comfortable, but it's also not too loose, because if it's too loose, your shoulder straps can actually slide off. All right, and that's why it's very important to take note of that. If you look at more of your advanced harnesses, your 2-point harnesses, or your Delta, or your Exifit, like you can see here, there's various types in the market, but some of these also have your D-rings. Now the D-ring is very important as well, because remember, the back D-ring you can suspend on, the same as with your front D-ring. But now if the front D-ring is to either side, it means that you're going to hang skew in case of a fall. In this case, when you fit your harness, make sure that the D-ring is situated in the middle of your chest. Right, middle of your chest means that when you fall, you will hang vertically like I'm standing, and that is also part of the fitment process that you need to make sure that you check. Adjust the strap, bring it as close to the middle of your chest as possible. Right, the next step, and this is again depending on the equipment that you have, the next step will be to fit your work positioning belt around your waist. Now, as you can see, the Rebel harness does not have that. It doesn't make it a bad harness, it doesn't make it a less proper harness. It just means that for the type of work the person will be doing, let's say for a construction site, this does not need a work positioning belt. You just need a simple climbing harness. In this case, we normally focus on harnesses where the guys do work positioning. They might do rescue situations. They might work on rooftops where they need to be positioned on the side of a roof before accessing the roof. Various options are available. But these are then fitted after your chest strap. All right, you will then fit that, make sure that it's nice and comfortable. It doesn't have to be tight. It's not carrying any weight. It will just be used for leaning back using your hands free. And then obviously the last section that we do is your leg straps. Now the leg straps, again, if you fall, and this is a good question we normally ask during training, is that if you fall and you hang vertically, where's most of the pressure? And the answer is always straightforward, and that is on your legs. All right. Now, a funny thing is that when the leg straps are not tight enough, many people don't like tight webbing belts around their thighs. They make it loose. It's hanging right about the middle part of their leg. And then they climb up and they assume that, listen, I'm going to work safe. Right, which is not the case. When you fit these leg straps, it must be of such a nature that you can have two fingers fitting through the leg strap. Anything tighter than that is too tight. Anything loose, where you can actually fit your hand through, is too loose. All right. What happens when it's too loose is that when you fall, the leg straps will actually rip up. And I don't have to stress what might happen, especially if you're a man, if that happens. And that can cause extreme pain, and it can cause actually the webbing to cut into your flesh. Now remember, the looser the leg straps, the more movement you've got onto the harness, onto your body. So that means that the more movement you have, the more pressure this harness will put onto your body when you actually fall, and it can actually cut into your flesh. And that's why it's very important that the harness that you can see here must actually sit like a glove. Right, it must fit snugly around your body, it must be tight in all the right areas, and it must make sure that it's properly attached if you look at the buckles and those type of things, so nothing can go loose during a fall. Okay, so those are the points that I want to stress. I just want to run through that again just to focus. When you fit, first of all, make sure that you fit your shoulder straps. Then check your butt strap. Is it below your butt? Then your chest strap, if you have it, your work positioning belt, and the last is your leg straps. And make sure that the leg straps is always as tight as possible. Not too tight, but 2 fingers, test it, make sure that it's actually properly done. Right, if you need adjustment on any part of your harness, again, make sure that it fits your harness properly. Adjust it before you climb up, because you cannot do this when you climb up. And then you can actually work. Right. Another thing that I want to make sure that I focus on, and this is where not the nice to haves, but the practicalities of a harness comes into play. Now, if you look at these harnesses, you will see that we've got these funny little clip-on sections. Now, these are what we call parking points. And it's designed with a clip-on part specifically in that in case of a fall, if you attach your lanyard in that part. Now, when you climb, you're not always, or when you work, you don't always want to work with both lanyards attached. And that's 100% safe. One of them might be in this situation. But now keep in mind, if you only have one on the structure and one like this, and you fall, the shortest one will pull tight first. Which means that if this one does not have a breakaway section, you will hang skew. You will hang at an angle, meaning you put pressure on the one part of your body. And that is actually not correct, because that will cause a lot of injuries, a lot of discomfort, and a lot of pain. Right, so what makes this unique is that it will actually break away in case of a fall, and you will be suspended vertically. That is very important. Now, it's a piece of equipment that you don't always find in your lower end harness or your entry level harnesses. It's more of your high end harnesses, but you will see that the Rebel harness, which is a purely entry level harness, rated for 140 kilograms, has these included. So when you fall, these parking points will break away under 25 to 50 kilograms of pressure, making sure that the guy will be suspended vertically. Right, now, you might ask me, why is that important for inspection and maintenance? Obviously, if one of these parking points has broken away, it means that a fall has taken place. Or pressure was put onto the harness, and if that is broken, you cannot use that harness. So another inspection point that you need to focus on. So it's very important that you understand there's basic components that you need to check, the 4 levels, but there's also, you need to understand what equipment you're using and align your inspection criteria as per the piece of equipment. So that brings us to the end of the theory component. I hope I created a lot of information that you can use. It's only focusing on the bare basics, the bare minimum, but it's important that you get the basics right before you can move up and make sure that you focus on the rest. Right, so inspection and maintenance, I just want to recap, make sure that you've got the different levels. of inspection included as part of your plans. Make sure the guys are competently trained to actually inspect their own equipment, and then focus your inspection criteria onto the different pieces of equipment that you use. Look at the manufacturer specifications, look at what the requirements of what you want to use the equipment for, and then align your equipment inspection and maintenance criteria according to that. Thank you very much, guys. That was then the last point and the last topic that I wanted to cover. We're going to go straight into the Q&A session now, so please feel free to access the link as well, and make sure that you ask the questions, and let's see if we can assist you. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for attending the workshop today. We really appreciate your attendance. So I was tracking the questions coming out of the workshop, and there wasn't really any questions or feedback from your side. So just 2 points that I wanted to highlight as we end the workshop. The first thing is that we've got a new system that we use for inspection, servicing, and maintenance of various equipment called SafeTrack. Now, SafeTrack, if I can maybe just highlight a few points, is that it's actually a very a good system that uses tagging as a means of making sure that you track the equipment. Now, it is an automated planning and inspection system. Obviously, like I said, it uses tags that you can actually physically attach to the harnesses, the lanyards, the ladders, the scaffolding, anything, and you can just walk past it, scan it, and it will provide you with a lot of information. Right, so it uses RFID technology, and it's normally used for asset registers. It's used for detailed records, as indicated. It can provide you with locations of that equipment on site or on different sites if you have a few sites running at the same time. And then also it's there to assist you with scheduling reports, meaning it can give you reminders of when you need to inspect. It can give reminders of when you need to have it recertified. So it's a brilliant tool to use. Now, just to confirm again, it's called SafeTrack. And if you want us to do a live demo for you on site, please have the details, your details emailed through, and we can arrange a time and a place where we can actually show you what it actually does. Right, the last point is the next workshop. And, we want to focus on key issues in the industry these days. And anchor points and lifelines is one of those issues that we want to focus on, because there is still a lot of guys doing things in the industry that is not aligned to actually what's the right way. And therefore, we're going to focus on anchor points and lifelines, and we're going to look at the safe installation thereof. We're going to look at the standards of those, and also the competency linked to who can install, who can recertify, and obviously at the end of the day, who can safely use these as well. Right, so I'll confirm the date and time with you via social media or via email, but please join us for this. If you also have any questions that you want to send to us in advance, please feel free to do that. We can include that already, and we can cover those points during the workshop, and we can make sure that you get a lot of valuable information from them. But thank you very much from my side joining us on the workshop today, and hope you've got a great day. Thank you.